This is Matt Hurt at Obsessive Viewer on Twitter.
This is Tiny at Obsessive Tiny on Letterboxd.
And this is ObsessiveViewer.com's The Obsessive Viewer Podcast. Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a movie and TV podcast that covers a specific topic, be it genre, trope, movie, or show, each episode. You can find more of our work at ObsessiveViewer.com, more of our podcasts at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. You can also like us on Facebook and join the Facebook group at Facebook.com/TheObsessiveViewer. You can also follow us on Letterboxd at Obsessive Viewer, Obsessive Tiny, and I am Mike White. And finally, you can support us on Patreon at Patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer at the minimum rate of $1 per month for an exclusive RSS feed with content recorded specifically for Patreon supporters. Also, a newly minted tier to the Patreon feed is that if you pledge $5 or more, you will get access to my stupid face. Whenever I see a movie in the theater, I will record a 5 to 10 minute reaction video and post it to the Patreon feed for the $5 or more ones. That's a new thing. I have one for Ready or Not popped up on there. I don't know why I said it like that. But yeah, check that out. Patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. And Tiny.
Yes, sir.
How is it going?
It's good. It's been a long minute.
It has.
Since I was on Obsessive Viewer.
Yes, it really has. We've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work with Tower Junkies.
Yep.
I'm really excited because Tower Junkies, our Stephen King Dark Tower podcast, is actually going to be reasonably, hopefully, knock on wood, reasonably consistent, at least in October.
Yeah.
Because we have some episodes that are banked for the lead up to Dr. Sleep. Yeah, and then today the Institute came out, so super excited about that.
Yes,
but
sir.
That's Tower Junkies.
Mm-hmm.
This is Obsessive Viewer. Yeah, so yeah, it's been a while since you've been on like a full episode.
Yeah.
I checked the archive. You were on the episode where I talked about Good Boys, and we talked about something. It was the one that I spliced together with my recording with Kirsten.
Yeah.
Were you on it? Yes.
I was, yeah.
Yes.
Damn, I don't even remember what we talked about.
I don't know either. I really hope it was good for the audience. Yeah, Good Boys, and was it just extended potpourri?
I think it was.
Yeah.
I don't even remember.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that's, okay, it was the Matrix 4 news, Sony versus Disney, Spider-Man and the MCU. So yeah, it was just kind of a news roundup kind of thing.
Yeah.
Disney Plus, and I talked about Seven Samurai on 35mm.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, so that was okay. So we had our 6-year anniversary back in June, and that episode was that episode that you were on for that I just referenced, was the first episode of year 7 of the podcast that you've been on.
Oh my gosh.
So we've got to rectify that, Tiny.
Yeah.
Yes. But like I said, we've been doing a lot of Tower Junkies work, so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which this is work. Yeah. So I'm docking you a week's pay.
Oh man.
Yeah. So today, what are we talking about, Tiny?
We were talking about a 2019 documentary called Rapid Response.
Yes.
Sort of about the birth and after that evolution of motorsports medicine, kind of.
Yes. Super excited to talk about that because we both grew up in Speedway. You grew up and are a grown-up racing fan.
I am.
I grew up annoyed at the loud noises.
Nice.
No, I never really took to auto racing or anything, so I think that'll yield some interesting conversation about this documentary.
Nice.
But before we do that, this is a bonus episode. That's pretty much all we're going to talk about. Maybe dip into some Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we have some news and updates and everything that we need to go through. Mm-hmm. So, as referenced before, we have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. We have some new patrons and donations and everything, and new Patreon rewards that I referenced. So, just want to highlight that. We have new patrons, Aaron Jones, from the UK, and Matt Smeltzer from You're Gonna Love This or Not. He pledged to it as well. And then also we have Robert in Utah upgraded his Patreon thing. So be like Robert.
Yes.
No. I mean, pay us what you want. Like,
Yeah.
like it's seriously, like it's anything's appreciated. We really appreciate it.
Totes.
And don't like go out of like don't. Overdraft your account or anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you guys for supporting us and everything. Check out the feed and all that. So, and we got a couple of donations. Aaron donated in addition to his Patreon support. And then also, Robert in Utah donated as well. And he had a pitch for an idea for an episode that I'm going to keep secret for the podcast. Like, Tiny, you already know about it.
You sly minx.
Yes. So I'm hoping my foot is going to be in my mouth, I swear. I'm really hoping that we can get that to be like our Halloween episode.
Okay.
So we'll work on that. So very excited about that. Couple other things. One is I was a guest on two, count them two, won't take you long, because it's two, how many times can I say that number? Different, Twilight Zone podcasts.
Oh, wow.
Recently. So, my Twilight Zone podcast anthology is currently on a brief break from it because I just haven't had the time to really dive back into it. But I've had the time to record 2 guest spots on 2 other Twilight Zone podcasts. So anyway, if you're hurting for more anthology, check out, or if you want, better Twilight Zone coverage, check out, Between Science and Superstition. I was on, an episode where we basically just kind of shot the shit. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
That is at, I think their URL is bsas.com, but I know that it's also betweenscienceandsuperstition.com. Anyway, so check that out. And also I made my third appearance on the submitted for your approval Twilight Zone podcast, my friend Brandon's podcast about the Twilight Zone, and we talked about the episode from season 3 of the original series titled Still Valley. It was a lot of fun, so I highly recommend checking out both of those podcasts, not just my episodes, but check out their podcasts and everything, because they're great people.
Cool.
So both podcasts have good people.
Nice.
I don't know why I said it like that. So anyway, let's dive into this.
Let's.
Yes.
When I was growing up, I would get a favorite race driver. He might be killed 2 weeks later. So I get another favorite race driver. He'd get killed 2 or 3 weeks later. 1 out of 7 drivers was killed every year.
My dad used to tell me that they're going to bring you back home in a body bag. Drivers in those days kind of accepted getting hurt.
There were no paramedics. Drivers would stop their car and run over and try to get somebody out of a burning car.
Gasoline explodes. Gasoline is a bomb.
We can't have this happen again.
So, Tiny, we both watched Rapid Response, which is a documentary. Okay. A 2019 documentary. IMDb plot summary is, in 1966, medical student and racing fan Stephen Olvey gets the opportunity of a lifetime when he is asked to volunteer at the Indianapolis 500 on their medical team. What started as a fun insider view of a sport he loved quickly devolves before his eyes as he sees the level of medical support given to the drivers whom he has befriended is terrifyingly non-existent. There's more to it, but I don't want to give much more away. It's a documentary about the medical, people, the medical responses and everything.
Right.
And the medical service, I guess, in the, racing community, and how people involved in the Indianapolis 500 and that were volunteering for the Indianapolis 500 kind of spearheaded this kind of like you said, evolution of evolving it into a much safer and humane practice.
Yeah.
So this documentary was directed by Michael William Miles and Roger Hines. I'm so sorry. But it is currently this week. We're recording this Tuesday night, September 10th. It is currently playing at Southern Plaza, the AMC Theater on the South Side. I would hope that it's going to go for another week, but it's very possible that by the time you're listening to this, it will only be in theaters for like a day. And I would say, spoiler for the review, I would say go check it out, especially if you're interested in racing in the racing community and medical stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah, let me actually check and see if they have their stuff posted. So anyway, Tiny, I feel like we are at an interesting, let's see. Oh, it will be playing for another week at AMC, on the South Side, Southern Plaza. So definitely check that out. Yep. So anyway, I feel like we're in an interesting position because, as I said, we both live in Speedway-ish, and both grew up in Speedway. You grew up a racing fan. I grew up a fan of listening to the buzzing of the cars from a mile and a half away. So how did you feel going into this documentary? And how did you feel about the documentary in kind of broad terms?
I was really, I mean, obviously to admit my bias right off the bat, because of everything you just said, I was already on board with this hook, line, and sinker. And
for context, how many Indianapolis 500s have you been to in your life?
I have missed one Indy 500 since 1999.
Jeez.
So I've been to 20, but I have, in the last 20 years, I've only missed one.
Wow.
So, yeah.
What happened?
Cars turned left a lot.
Oh, no, I mean, what happened that you missed the one?
That's when I hurt my back.
Oh.
And I didn't want to go sit on bleachers for 4.5, 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do it.
Okay.
So I didn't go that year. I think it was 2008.
Okay.
Was the year I didn't go.
Wow.
But then the years after that, I was like, fuck it, I'm going. I really don't want to miss it again.
Nice.
Because it's one of my favorite things in the world.
So actually, before we get into it, like, what is it about going to the race and racing, auto racing, that appeals to you and everything? Because, like I said, I've lived here for most of my life at this point, and I mean, it's just something that never really hooked me.
Yeah.
So what is it about it that really appeals to you?
I think I really love tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Tradition in general, it just appeals to me. It's an aspect of history, and I've been a history buff for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of the reason why I'm also a Notre Dame fan.
Oh, okay.
Because Notre Dame is a traditionally powerhouse football program, and there's a lot of tradition with that school.
Mm-hmm.
In college football in general, there's like I kind of shit on the NFL all the time because I'm like, college football is just, I think, objectively so much better because there's tradition and rivalry and energy that you're never going to see in an NFL game.
Right.
That's every Saturday at every college game. So I think it's something about that draws me in. And the Indy 500 is just steeped in tradition and history. It's also the largest sporting venue in the world. The population of Speedway the day before Labor Day or the day before Memorial Day every year changes from 14,000 to about 350,000.
Jeez, I did not realize it was that big of a jump.
If it like the 100th running, there will, like when they talk about like not just the attendance but like media, racing teams, all the vendors and all that stuff, there were almost 500,000 people at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
And I like to put into context my relationship to it and everything. When you were saying that, I was like, have they already done the 100th running? Or is that coming up?
That was 2016.
Okay, that's what I thought.
This year was the 103rd.
Nice.
So yeah, and like for context, you could fit Kentucky Downs, Kentucky Derby, that racetrack,
Sure.
I don't know. Yankee Stadium, the Roman Coliseum, and a bunch of other things inside the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at the same time.
I want to say that one of those other things, and this could be me being really stupid, is one of those things the Vatican?
It might be. You could fit the Vatican inside the Indianapolis
That is
Motor Speedway.
nuts.
Yeah, that's just how big it is. It's just a huge place. And when you're there, and like I used to sit at the top of Turn 4, which
Terrifying.
is one of the highest points in the. It's one of the highest points in the venue. My buddy and I sat there for years. You can see 200,000 people. Like think about all the places you've been in your life. How often have you physically in person seen 200,000 people?
Jeez.
Like it's probably a lot of people have probably never.
Sharktober in Irvington last year.
Nice. But I mean, imagine going to your average NFL football game and triple that.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So that's just like honestly, the atmosphere is the best thing about it.
Okay.
Like I enjoy the racing too. Like that's totally cool. And it's pretty amazing to see a car go 230 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I love the engineering of it and all that. But for me, it's the tradition and the atmosphere. That's what totally makes it for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the tradition, atmosphere, and seeing that and everything, like, to get even more specific, like, is that enough? Like, is that why you like sitting or standing in an open environment in late May?
Yep.
So I can't, like, it's exhausting just thinking about it.
Yeah. You know what? It's kind of a sick thing where I kind of love it. It's like, like the price of your ticket is not just, the $100 you pay for the ticket. It's the buckets of sweat and the sun and the, getting up early and it's like, it's just everything. I'm like, it's like my wife will bitch about it. She's like, oh, we got to walk all the way down there. And I'm like, it's part of the price of admission.
Jeez.
So I was like, it's the best day of the year. Let's go. Like I just, you can't ruin my mood on race day. Like that's just how I know it's goofy, but I'm not going to make excuses for it.
Oh, no. I'm not judging. It's something that I just never really connected to. I will say, racing video games, all about them.
Oh, yeah, those are fun.
Yeah, one of the Gran Turismo games had Indianapolis Motor Speedway on it.
Yeah.
And, it was really cool. Like, it was awesome.
Yeah.
But, so going into the documentary, like, how did you feel in broad terms about the documentary as well?
I think in terms of, production value and the style of it, I think they did a good job. Like, I think it's a good documentary in and of itself. Obviously, I loved it because of the subject matter. But I think it's the subject in and of itself. Even if you take out the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it's a really fascinating story.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys developed motorsports medicine. Like, it's not like, oh, we figured out how to, how to make the cars, how to make people not die. Like, no, like, no one was asking these guys, like, hey, can you guys, like, develop a technique for extracting someone from a car? They did it because they wanted to.
Yeah.
And they were curious about the science, and they, befriended these drivers, and they didn't like seeing them die.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, also, drivers were dying.
Yeah, 1 out of every 7 back in the 60s.
And that is what kind of struck me so much about the documentary.
Yeah.
Like, as someone who is kind of on the outside of like this kind of racing culture, this fandom, what have you, even though I'm obviously very well aware of the ins and outs of it just by just living near it, and knowing that, like, on race day, okay, I'm not going to leave my apartment until all the 300,000 people have left town.
Right.
But like, what struck me about it is, like, memories of, like, okay, when I was a kid, the most interesting thing to me about racing, because, like, my dad was into it, like, he would watch it and stuff, and, like, we would do, like, a thing where, race morning, we would like, in the newspaper, they would have, like, the lineup.
Yeah.
Yes. And they would have, like, pictures of the drivers next to their car.
Yeah.
We would tear them out individually and then put them in a hat, and then, like, each of us would pick, like, one.
Yeah.
And, like, whoever got the winner, like, got bragging rights. I don't
bragging
think
rights, yeah.
But anyway, so, like, the tradition there. But, the most interesting thing to me about watching motorsports like that is like when things go awry, like wrecks and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, that's me as a kid. And like, one of the really interesting things about this documentary is that it I wouldn't say it recontextualizes it, but it's like, it opens my eyes to like, okay, like wrecks, like people will go to a race and like they'll be weirdly, morbidly thrilled by a wreck, but it's like, these are people that could die in like, especially like open wheel racing, and like the, like IndyCar racing, like is depicted in this documentary. Like it's open. Like
you can see their heads just chilling there.
Oh yeah. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, oh my God. And like the footage that they show is like, it's very tastefully done, and it's done in such a way, it's shown in such a way that it's very clearly getting its point across in the documentary that, yeah, these are horrific incidents and accidents that, for decades, it took a long time for them to develop like safety precautions and stuff. It was just, I was really fascinated by the way that the documentary kind of showcased how it was just kind of like, a hazard of the job, like it,
right.
I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's a risk he took.
Yeah. But yeah, it was really, really engaging, I thought.
Definitely. Like the wreck of, Danny Ongaius, 1981. That I had heard about that wreck. Obviously, I wasn't there. I wasn't born yet. Yeah. But my father-in-law is a huge Indy 500 fan.
Okay.
And he used to go to the races, and like I remember we were at he loves to go to a local restaurant here in town that's been around for a while called Charlie Brown's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you worked there for
I worked there for like a few weeks.
Right.
And I won't tell that story. Okay. I'll save that for Patreon.
Yeah. Well, there's a racing theme at the restaurant. And a bunch of the drivers have actually, one time Paige and I went there, we saw AJ Foyt there.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I was just like, it was incredible. But
I've probably seen a bunch of people
did.
there.
You
and
probably
I'm just like,
did.
oh, pancakes.
Right. But anyways,
it's interesting that it's racing themed too, because like,
yeah,
I mean, very famous race car driver was Charlie Brown.
Yes, he was totally.
It's a really great restaurant. I really love that place.
It's awesome. It's a breakfast joint mostly. Anyways, there was there's memorabilia all over the place, and there was a picture or something or a poster of Danny Ongaius, and I didn't know who he was, and we took my father-in-law there, and he loved it, of course, because of all the racing stuff. And
the pancakes.
And the pancakes, yeah. Stuff. But he saw that picture and he's like, oh man, that's Danny Ongaius. And I was like, yeah, who was that? And he was like, just let out a big sigh, because he was like there when he died.
Jeez.
Like, and he didn't see it like in person, but he was like, there's 300,000 people there, and he's like, you would not believe how quiet it was.
Really?
When they were, because like,
Man.
because as Dr. Olvey, the main doctor in the documentary, talked about, when they showed up to the wreckage, basically they just like got out a sheet and laid it over.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
And he was like, when we saw that happening on the big screen, we were just like, it was just so quiet. He's like, I'll never forget that. So that's that, like,
wow.
When he told me that story, I was just like, really, that was a pretty amazing story that he remembered that. And that kind of puts it in perspective to how, wrecks are exciting and big and kind of fun. Like, I hate to say it, but it's kind of fun. But it's really, it's a super morbid thing that it's exciting, and part of you wants to see wrecks, but at the same time, like, as soon as they happen, you're like, holy shit. And like, the worst I ever felt was I sent you a video.
Yes. I'll put a link in the show notes.
It was the 101st running of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Scott Dixon.
Which was in 2017.
It was 2017.
Yes.
Yeah. Scott Dixon and, I can't remember the other guy's name. He's not a big name. Scott Dixon is a multiple time champion of IndyCar, but he got airborne. He ran into this other guy, 200 miles an hour, got airborne. When his car finally stopped, he only had one wheel left on it.
He landed on a wall.
Right.
That just like
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Just look up the 2017 Scott Dixon wreck in the short chute between turns 1 and 2. I just remember, like, because we were sitting very, very close to that, not right in front of it, but like, I remember when that wreck happened and I could hear the fireball of his fuel exploding. I was like, I just witnessed Scott Dixon die.
Yeah.
Like that's what I thought. And like, I just remember that. I distinctly remember that feeling. I was like, oh my fucking God, they're going to pull his corpse out of that car.
Yeah.
I was so like, kind of scared almost.
Sure.
Cause, Dan Weldon also had died, like 5 years before.
Okay.
That was at Las Vegas. It was a different, track, but like that hit racing fans really hard.
Oh yeah.
I'd actually met him in person once. He's the nicest fucking guy ever. So I was like, man, I don't want that to happen again. That was just horrible for the sport. And, he was perfectly fine.
Wow.
Scott Dixon just walked away from it. He's like, not scratch on him. And I was like, no fucking way. I was like, there's no way. I thought he was dead.
Yeah.
He's perfectly fine.
I don't want to spoil it for the documentary because I definitely want people to see this documentary and stuff. But at the end of the documentary, there's the depiction of a certain driver's accident.
Yeah.
That was just like it was horrific.
Yeah.
And just like the story of that was just, man, like, I can't imagine, like, that's one thing. So, something that I've come to terms with about my personality and me as a person is that I cannot fathom what it takes or what type of person it takes to be able to do, like, that type of, like, medical work.
Yes.
Like kind of like a trauma unit or triage kind of thing, or like this specific type of thing where they are literally waiting for something to happen. If something happens, they have to be there. Stat, no pun intended.
Right.
And then like just assess like what it must take to have your head clear enough to where you can assess what's going on.
Yeah.
Make like a split second decision about what to do in order to literally, in some cases, save a person's life or what have you. Like, I can't put myself into those shoes.
Me either.
It's really remarkable. And I think it's something that in showcasing the kind of origin of this type of medical, service, I guess, and the evolution of it, I feel like the documentary does a really good job of just, of putting us into like the history of this particular type of medical service and everything. And as it evolves throughout the years, it's really interesting to see like what went into evolving it and figuring out like the best way to not have people die.
Right. The science was super interesting. Because basically I never really thought of it as, I guess, as a non-medical person, you kind of just think of trauma as trauma. Right. Like, someone getting in a wreck on the highway isn't any different than someone getting in a wreck at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Right. When as you're talking about like difference of about 150 miles an hour. Yeah. I guess I just didn't think about it. I guess you think of trauma as trauma. That's what you think of, but it's, these guys were dealing with medical trauma that no one else ever sees. Yes. Like even in a war zone, like the trauma you see in war zone is different than trauma you see, like a gunshot wound from a war is different than a gunshot wound from, a weekend in Chicago. Right. Yeah. But so like it's the same thing with motorsports and just regular an auto wreck. And like I never thought about that. And these guys had to invent the wheel with motorsports trauma. I mean, and the one guy, the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Trammell, I believe his name was, that's like his story is incredible. Oh, absolutely. The dedication of the two main doctors, Dr. Olvey and Dr. Trammell, is really just remarkable. Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's a lot of stuff I'm passionate about or things I'm passionate about, but I don't know that I could invent the wheel the way these guys did. It's like Tony Kanaan got in a wreck in Japan and he told them not to fix his broken arm until he got back to Indianapolis so Dr. Trammell could fix it. He kept his arm. I was like, shut the fuck up. That's crazy. Oh yeah. So that was
Tony Kanaan, be serious.
Oh boy.
I'm so sorry.
It was bound to happen.
Yes, it was. But yeah, can I confess something real quick?
Okay.
Every time they mentioned Dr. Trammell as being an orthopedic doctor, so for the longest time during the documentary, I had to pause it and look it up. I kind of got orthopedic confused with something. I thought it was like a foot doctor.
Oh, like podiatry?
A podiatry, yeah. And I was like sitting there thinking like, wow, their feet must be really, like that's a real trouble area. Like, I guess since they have like the pedal and stuff.
Yeah. That's funny.
But no, an orthopedic doctor is a doctor of bones and muscles and interior stuff.
I don't even know, really.
Yes.
Like a structural doctor, essentially.
Sure.
The structure of the human body,
Yeah.
for more lack of a better word, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there is specifically like one part that goes into it's talking about the science of like what happens in the car with the driver when it experiences that trauma and stuff. I thought that like the computer generated like demonstration that they showed was like, it was talking about concussions.
Right.
And like, it's just seeing that visually represented in like a kind of like a computer kind of like generated way.
Yeah.
Seeing like what happens like in the skull was really like put it into an interesting context and everything.
Definitely.
So I really appreciated that.
As someone who's had several concussions.
Right.
Yeah.
From the foosballs.
From the foosballs.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. Side note. There was a documentary about football, high school football, and like it was like narrated by Friday Night Lights. Taylor Kitsch.
Oh, okay.
Narrated by him, and I think the guy who played Jason Street on Friday Night Lights was like involved in it because he had like an organization or something. Or I don't know. But anyway, it was about like spinal cord injuries in high school football players and stuff. And like, I only watched like 10 or 15 minutes of it because like it kept saying like it was framing it in a way that's like, but like football is so amazing and everything, and is it worth all the spinal injuries? And like, I just thought of like that Parks and Rec episode where they're looking at like the smog and the pollution and stuff and like the beautiful sunset, and it's like, oh, it's all the runoff from the Sweetums factory. It's beautiful, but is it worth all the asthma? And then Ben Wyatt's like, no. Like, that's how I felt watching this. I was like, is it worth all the spinal injuries? Like, no, it's not.
No.
Like, no.
I don't think it is.
No.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway, so that's a small tangent, but rapid response. Yeah, so, we won't do like spoilers or anything like that.
Right.
Or I'm trying to think of car stuff, like spoilers on a car, or
oh my God.
we won't do like spoilers or sunroofs. That's stupid because it's not IndyCar.
Not so much.
Yeah, we won't open the wheel to spoil. I don't know. Anyway,
God.
Yeah. So good documentary.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about it is that just how long it took. Because I think it said Dr. Olvey said that he started in 1960 something.
Oh yeah,
is when he first like was able to volunteer. He was like just out of medical school or a medical student, and I mean they were talking about like major wrecks, major events that happened all the way up to the late 90s.
Yes,
where they were still developing technologies.
Oh yeah,
and like they didn't really have a set like really good system until like the late 90s. Like you're talking over 30 years.
Yeah.
That these guys are just plugged away.
Yeah.
And like,
and it's like,
it's crazy.
And it's not just like safety measures for like the driver or anything. And like, we're talking about like response to accidents. Like the idea of having like an ambulance drive to the wreck is like a big leap forward in the response. It's just, it's insane.
Totally.
And like, yeah. And I was like, while watching it, they talked about how like, okay, well, you know, with it, like they came to a decision after a certain point that's like, well, you know, should probably take them to the hospital before like we take them to the actual like medical facilities in the thing.
Right.
In the venue and everything. And it's like they were talking about like, okay, well, helicopters, and like they were talking about the business side of it of like, okay, a track or a venue, like the cost of having like a helicopter on hand to take someone to the hospital was like they were talking about how it was maybe not as cost effective to their bottom line and everything. And like they were talking about how they were suggesting like, well, maybe we can just get like news helicopters. It's like, they're not outfitted for that type of transportation.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because you get a window into, I don't know. It doesn't like vilify anyone. It's just like, this is how it was. This is how it evolved. This is how it is now. But it's so weird to see like such rampant, like disregard for safety. 'Cause like we're living in the present and like this is all kind of something we maybe not take for granted, but it's like something that's like, oh, this is how it is. Like they have these things in place. It's like in the early days they didn't.
Right.
Just really interesting documentary, I thought.
Yeah, they talked about how some of the medical facilities were, a lean-to with a dirt floor.
Exactly.
And the first quote unquote ambulance ever used at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was a hearse.
Yes.
Yeah. From a funeral home that's still there.
Right down the street.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, it was just remarkable.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think now I don't think about, since I've been a racing fan, that's been, another interesting conversation is that, so the track record for speed at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is over 20 years old.
Wow.
It's set by Arie Luyendyk in like 1997. And no one's come close to it in 20 years. And so that's what's interesting. You equate motorsports with speed, and it's always about like, how can we go faster? How can we go faster? And so over the last 20 to 30 years, the innovation has really gotten away from speed, and all the innovation over the last 20, 30 years has been in safety.
Wow.
It's really incredible to think about, like the Hans unit and the, every time they redesign the car, they take safety into account and how to better protect the drivers. Like if you watch that Scott Dixon wreck, his car completely disintegrates into pieces. And it turns out that it's actually designed to do that because #physics, the more things fly off the car, the more energy it carries away from the car and it slows it down quicker. So it's actually a good thing that his tires completely flew away because that dissipates energy. Physics, right?
Sure.
It's like stuff I don't understand, but it's like, you see these wrecks, and it's the same thing in NASCAR too. The car just disintegrates, and it's just a shell sitting there. Well, that shell is made out of like super thick steel that protects them, and like that's what it's supposed to do. And, 20 years ago, no one ever thought of that.
Right.
And it's just my father-in-law. He was like, that's an interesting point about motorsports. Is when he was growing up, it was all about like, oh, what's the new top speed going to be?
Yeah.
And it was like, it's like, holy shit, they cracked 200 miles an hour. That's incredible. And he's like, no one cares about speed anymore. It's not about, 230 miles an hour is pretty fast. I don't think it's not a big deal to go 250.
Yeah.
Like it's just not, I don't think we're all looking for that. You know what I'm saying? I think it's kind of reached the pinnacle of speed. Cause if you go and I think there's an interesting thing about how, in the documentary, about how you can't really go faster, and it kind of comes up at a point in the documentary to where it's not physiologically possible to go faster with a human in the car. But that's been an interesting conversation that I've had with my father-in-law, is that all the innovation is in safety, and it's actually pretty interesting. And I think it's an old school and a new school, old school versus new school way of thinking. But I think a lot of the old school fans find the new innovation still pretty interesting.
Nice.
But yeah, it's that's just something I kind of picked up on in the documentary. So
nice. It's funny. A couple things about that are adjacent to that. Did you see this video that was going around a couple days ago? That there's a Bugatti Chiron Super Sport, I think, that set a record I think, set a record. It went over 300 miles per hour.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yep. I'll put a link in the show notes and everything.
Good god.
Yeah, it's funny, and I've mentioned this before, but like there's a book that I read like the first like half of on Kindle like years ago called Blood and Smoke. That's about like the history of auto racing and Indy 500 and everything. And like I vividly remember like this part where this like there was a quote from like a race car driver from like the early days of like the Indy 500, where it's like when they first started going like 60 miles per hour. And like way back in the day, and like the driver said like humans were not meant to go this fast.
That's funny.
Yeah, like that always stuck. Like I read it like way back in the day, but yeah,
that's funny.
Humans were not meant to travel at these speeds.
Yeah, I think the average speed for the very first Indy 500, the car was called the Marmon Wasp. I think it was like the average speed was like 48 miles an hour or something.
Jeez.
It's some crazy.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it on the track before.
Yeah.
It still runs.
I've seen it on the interstate.
No, I've seen the car that Marmon Wasp. I saw they brought it out for a lot of the Centennial stuff.
Oh, nice.
I was like, man, that thing's fucking
Back
slow.
in 2016.
Yeah.
I pay attention. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say is like that Scott Dixon crash and everything, like, as you said, like it's like now safety regulations are to have like the car disintegrates on purpose, because of physics and everything. But like something that struck me, and I don't know if you know the answer to this offhand, but like how much does like a single race car like that cost?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, it's expensive.
Yeah.
I know that.
Because like, I mean, with a crash like that, like it's done. Like there's nothing.
Right. Right.
And do you think that, because like NASCAR is also a thing, stock car racing.
Yes.
Because of the like build of the car and everything, like, because I don't know, as an outsider to this sport, like looking at like in IndyCar, like in open wheel car, like also F1 and like open wheel racing, versus like stock cars and stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, well, stock cars, NASCAR, whatever, is safer. Because like they have like they're inside.
Right.
Is that like true, or is that, do you think that that's?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, your head is exposed in an open car, and like it doesn't matter how good your helmet is.
Yeah. You
could still, a piece of debris could take your head off. That doesn't really happen though. You don't really hear about like decapitations.
Yeah, I feel like I would catch wind of that if that happened.
Well, and like you were talking about some of the footage from like the 60s and stuff, like those open wheel or open air cars, like were not designed to, like if they flip over, you get crushed and you die.
Right.
But now it's at the point where if you flip over and you land on top, like even at 200 miles an hour, your head is not going to hit the pavement.
Right.
Like they've changed that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good on them.
Right. But yeah, so I mean, I think just inherently there's still more risk with an open wheel car.
Yeah.
And it's harder to drive an open wheel car. Like I don't think there's any debate there, because if you touch wheels or anything, somebody's going to spin out. Like it's especially at 200 miles an hour. Whereas in NASCAR, they're fucking knocking around. It's damn near a demolition derby race. You can get into a wreck and still win the damn race. But if you get into a wreck in IndyCar, you're pretty much done for the day.
Yeah. Now what about the cars?
Cars. Oh.
From Cars.
Well, those are NASCARs, basically.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But joke landed. So
I would guess one of those cars costs at least a couple $100,000 at the minimum. I don't know. I don't think they're like $1 million, but I would say anywhere from like $200,000 to $500,000.
Okay.
Per car.
Okay.
If I had to guess.
Yeah.
I actually got to go work at a racing shop.
Oh, nice.
For like an Indy 500 team.
Nice.
I won't say what it is, but I actually like go in there and like the cars come apart into two major pieces, like kind of the front cab and then the rear of the car, which is where the engine and everything is.
Mhm.
And so I got to like see all that. Like I could like go up and touch it if I wanted to.
That's awesome.
That was like a religious experience for me. It was super cool. So the intricacy of the vehicles is just really amazing.
Another thing, going back to the wrecks and everything, and the kind of safety versus like IndyCar versus NASCAR. This is turning into this. This is the topic of the episode. But I kept thinking, because like looking at like seeing the footage of like the more horrific crashes that were depicted in the documentary, like I kept thinking like, okay, well, like I kept thinking that like, oh God, like that is so scary, and versus like, you know, like NASCAR and everything. But then I kept remembering like, Dale Earnhardt Sr., his wreck that killed him.
Yeah.
Like it looked, I remember that because it looks kind of just innocuous.
Yeah.
Like,
definitely.
Yeah. Like he goes into a turn and then he spins a little bit.
He spins a little bit and the back of his car just hits the wall.
Is it the back of the car or the front?
I think it was the back of his car.
Okay.
I think he kind of like spun out and then like slid up and the back hit.
Okay.
I can't even remember, frankly.
I want to say it's the front, but what do I know?
You might be right. I don't remember.
I've been to one auto race, and that was when I think the Indy 500 or the Brickyard got rained out, like.
Oh, really?
Like for a week, and they were just like, just come.
Yeah,
like,
just show
free.
up.
Let me actually look real quick.
But yeah, his wreck looks like nothing. I mean,
yeah.
It looks like he just kind of taps the wall and it killed him. But I think Dale Earnhardt was kind of a stubborn guy and was kind of like, he was like, I don't need all that safety shit. Like, I think when he died, I think he was still wearing like an open face helmet.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like he didn't wear the full helmet. And I think he was wearing one of those Hans devices that they mentioned towards the end of the documentary. I think he was wearing one of those, but I don't know.
Oh, okay. It was the front of the car.
Was it the front? Okay.
Yeah. He lost control, I think, going into a turn. And then he kind of, the car went right into the wall and, oh, that's interesting. I mean, it dragged a lot.
Right.
Yeah. So
it looks, I remember, when it happened, like I was just getting into NASCAR when that happened.
Oh yeah.
And I remember that, it was at Daytona too, which is, that's the big race for NASCAR. I remember watching that race and like seeing that wreck, and I was like, man, it doesn't look like it was a very traumatic wreck at all.
Right.
Yeah. And he died. Yeah. It's crazy. So.
Yeah. And then I think his son was in like Dukes of Hazzard or something.
Was Junior in Dukes of Hazzard?
I don't know.
I don't remember. He was on, if you want to hear some interesting, if you're into racing, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Okay.
This year, I think it was a handful of months ago. And he's retired now, but he had quite a few injuries from wrecks. Okay. He got several concussions, and he actually, I think the doctors were like, yeah, don't race anymore because you're messed up.
Yeah.
And he had to do like physical therapy. He had to like exercise his brain to recover from the concussions because he would like get fatigued really easily, and it's much better to hear him tell it, but he had to like do eye exercises to like strengthen his brain, and it took him like 2 years. Jeez. He was like miserable, like he put on weight and he was just like in pain every day, and it was all from his brain. Like it wasn't his physiologically it was in his brain. It wasn't really the rest of his body.
Wow.
He was in a nasty wreck at the 24 Hours at Daytona race. He was racing a Corvette. And he got like burned really bad. Ugh. He was in some crazy wrecks.
Also, not specific to cars. He's in like a plane wreck.
Yeah. Right. Recently. Yeah. It's crazy.
By the way, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was not in Dukes of Hazzard. I was thinking of AJ Foyt the Fourth.
Oh, okay.
Who, not to put her on the spot, but my sister, who has never listened to an episode of the podcast and never will, had such a crush on him.
Oh yeah.
AJ Foyt the Fourth, who ended up marrying Jim Irsay's daughter, I think.
Oh really?
Yeah. I Wikipedia'd him last night.
Nice.
But anyway, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was in Talladega Nights.
He was. Yeah. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So should we wrap things up?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yes. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. We also saw Hobbs and Shaw, but I forego that.
Yeah.
But if you are in the mood for a very engaging documentary and thrilling documentary, also just the way that it depicts the footage and everything is just very engaging and terrifying.
Yeah.
Check out Rapid Response. Like I said, it's playing at Southern Plaza here in Indianapolis. Check out, check your local listings.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I loved it, but I knew I was going to, and I can't separate my bias from it. I just can't.
I really didn't know how I was going to respond to it because it just isn't something that really interests me, the subject matter, but
right.
It's a well done documentary that is an interesting story and everything. And that kind of is what hooked me.
Yeah. One thing I didn't mention just real quick is that they actually got quite a few legendary drivers.
They did.
To that they interviewed.
People that I've heard their name.
Right.
Yeah.
Elio Castroneves, Rick Mears, Bobby Unser. I mean, some big names. And I was kind of hoping that they did, but I wasn't sure, how that was going to work out. But yeah. And I had no idea that some of those guys suffered some pretty significant injuries.
Yeah.
Chip Ganassi, I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea that he had a wreck like that. So yeah, that was cool to see.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So, so I think that will do it.
Yep.
I did have something that I was saving for the end. So, as we wrap up and everything, I was going to pretend to put you on the spot, Tiny, and be like, yeah, we're going to have Tiny sing us a song. But,
oh my God.
I have no idea why. But I did want to mention that, sorry that we're not doing Sharktober in Irvington, guys.
Yeah.
We'll
Life
be back.
gets in the way.
It does. It does. So I did want to mention that our friends over at Nightmare on Edgewood, they are opening up their 2019 season. It opens September 20th and runs to November 9th. They are at a new location. It's at 1927 South Meridian Street in Indianapolis. It is, just to refresh everyone's memory, it's Indy's only full contact haunted house. It's their 41st season at a new permanent location. Again, that's September 20th is when they open. And it's on the same city block as House of Trepidation, which is another, haunted house that they've partnered with a lot and everything. So check that out, nightmareonedgewood.com. I'm sure they have tons of just really cool stuff this year, especially with the new location. And it's because the stuff that they did, the just intricacies of it, where they had their location for 40 years.
Yeah.
This new location, I'm sure is going to really up their game a lot.
Those guys are cool as hell.
Very cool.
If you want to talk about some passionate people.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. So check that out, nightmareonedgewood.com, September 20th to November 8th, I said? Yep. So check that out. And that'll do it for this episode of The Obsessive Viewer. We are going to, I have no idea what we're doing next week. I want to get Fecus back on because he's back from Italy.
Yeah.
So I'll contrive a reason to have him on.
Nice.
Also, I want to mention, or I want to get Kirsten back on because she just, last weekend shot a film.
Yeah.
That she was cast in. So I'm very excited to talk to her about that on mic.
Cool.
Also Mike, I want to get Mike back.
Yeah. Yeah. Always want to get Mike back.
So that'll do it for this episode. And coming up next week, not sure, but Tower Junkies, stay tuned. We're hopefully going to get, it chapter 2.
Yep.
Also, the Institute. Soon-ish.
Yeah.
And then before we know it, we're going to go into our Shining and Dr. Sleep series of episodes.
Yes.
And then Castle Rock. And
that.
oh, yeah. So
speaking of it, chapter 2, we're going to do a screening.
Yes, I forgot.
Obsessive Viewer screening on Sunday.
Sunday afternoon-ish.
That'll be the 15th?
The 15th? 15th, yes, I think, at Traders Point on the west side of Indianapolis.
Yes.
Yes, Sunday, September 15th. We haven't set a time yet. There is a 4 p.m. showing. They did have the updated ones. But go to the Facebook group at facebook.com/theobsessiveviewer. Join the Facebook group and check the comments on that. We're going to have a group screening. I'm very excited about it. We did this 2 years ago with it, Chapter 1. Super excited about it. Yeah, and we'll have our review. I kind of have the hiccups and the yawns, but we're going to have our review on Tower Junkies soon. So, yeah. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of The Obsessed Viewer. I think I've said that 3 times now. Check out Rapid Response and our It screening and everything. So, yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
And now, here's a short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. To hear the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. Yes, we received 2 new patrons. Aaron Jones, who found us through Tower Junkies, and now very kindly listens to the other podcast as well.
Nice.
Also, I'll talk about this in the episode, but he also donated to the podcast, so
thank
that's
you.
Great. Yes.
You done not messed up, AA Ron.
Yeah, that's all donations are final.
Say.
Just want to put that caveat out there.
No refunds, no backsies.
Yes.
The Obsessive Viewer podcast is edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For a full archive of our episodes, go to ObsessiveViewer.com/OV archive. You can also like our Facebook page and join the OV Facebook group at Facebook.com/TheObsessiveViewer. And follow us on Twitter at ObsessiveViewer and at ObsessiveTiny. And follow our recurring co-hosts at I am Mike White, that's me, at R.A. Feckus, and at Burger_Lurker. If you enjoy the show, please take a couple minutes to leave us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. This is the easiest way to support what we do, and all it costs is a little bit of your time. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can make a PayPal donation at obsessiveviewer.com/donate. Or support us on Patreon for recurring donations and access to commentary tracks and B-roll audio recorded exclusively for patrons at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. For official Obsessive Viewer merch, including shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, visit our TeePublic store. You can find a link to the store in the show notes of this episode and at obsessiveviewer.com/donate. Or you can simply search for Obsessive Viewer at teepublic.com, T-E-E, public.com. For information about our annual live event showcasing short horror films from local filmmakers, check out shocktoberInIrvington.com. And for an archive of all our events, as well as news about potential future events, head over to obsessiveviewer.com/live. For more podcast content, you can find Anthology, Matt's solo podcast covering The Twilight Zone and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology TV shows at anthologypod.com and on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. You can also find Tower Junkies, a podcast where Matt and Tiny share their love of all things Stephen King and his magnum opus, The Dark Tower series, at towerjunkiespod.com and at towerjunkiespod on Twitter. And finally, check out The Secular Perspective, Tiny's side project podcast, which tackles current events and life's big questions from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. The theme music for The Obsessive Viewer comes courtesy of the band Loudlike from their EP Mistakes We Must Make. Additional bumper music is provided courtesy of As Good As It Gets, which can be found at facebook.com/asgoodasitgetsband. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Kitty!